He had nothing but a worn-out blanket, a battered tin can, and a single rusted nail hammered into the wall of a shed at the far edge of town. 2 years earlier, he'd walked away from everything that felt familiar: his apartment, his job, the noise and bustle of strangers rushing past on crowded sidewalks. He'd thrown a few meager belongings into a battered backpack, locked the door behind him, and set off without a plan or destination. When night fell and the cold crept through his thin jacket, he'd stumbled upon the dilapidated shed, half hidden by overgrown weeds and twisted vines. Without hesitation, he'd pushed open the creaking door and claimed it as his own. In those early days, he'd rationed supplies from dumpsters behind grocery stores, ate stale bread and half-ripe fruit scavenged from alleyways, and drank rainwater he caught in a battered bucket. The shed offered shelter but little else. He'd cleared out spider webs, patched holes with pieces of cardboard and plastic sheeting, and fashioned a makeshift door lock out of that single nail and a loop of frayed wire. Every night he lay on a thin mattress salvaged from a curbside discard, listening to the wind whisper through gaps in the wood, feeling the rain seep in and pool at his feet. He never once regretted his choice to leave, for in isolation he found a strange comfort, a blank canvas upon which to confront his fears and rebuild himself from the ground up. Winter brought biting cold and long, silent nights. He learned to preserve body heat by lining the walls with shredded newspapers and torn clothing. He discovered how to start a small fire on a patch of bare earth, feeding it twigs and dry leaves he gathered at dawn. He survived storms that snapped tree branches overhead and floods that turned the ground to red mud. Each morning he emerged, his hair frosted with ice, and faced the world with renewed determination. Loneliness became his companion, a silent teacher that pushed him to reflect on past mistakes, lost loves, and roads not taken. He wrote lists in a battered notebook of goals: to learn new skills, to one day stand before society again without shame. By spring his beard had grown long and unkempt, his skin weathered by sun and wind. He built shelves from discarded planks. He scavenged, stacking cans of beans and packets of rice he traded for at a roadside market. He dug a small vegetable patch in the muddy ground, growing hardy greens and potatoes in fertilizer made from composted food scraps. He fashioned simple traps to catch squirrels and rabbits and learned to skin and prepare them over the embers of his fire. His body grew lean and strong, his mind sharpened by solitude and routine. News of the mysterious shed hermit spread through the town. At first people whispered rumors. He was a madman, a criminal hiding from the law, a refugee from a broken family. Some left food on his doorstep: loaves of bread, jars of peanut butter, even a tin of sweetened condensed milk. He accepted these offerings gratefully, but left small notes of thanks, scrawled on scraps of paper. Gradually, around the edges of town, people began to see him not as a threat, but as a local oddity, a man who'd chosen a radically simple life. Then came the eviction notice. A powerful developer named James Whitmore planned to tear down the shed and build luxury condos. Whitmore was a millionaire with a reputation for ruthlessness. He'd bulldozed historic buildings, driven out small businesses, and claimed the resulting skyscrapers as trophies of his ingenuity. When he set his sights on the overgrown lot at the edge of town, he sent a team of lawyers to serve the hermit, with papers demanding he vacate within 30 days. The town council backed him, enticed by promises of tax revenue and revitalization. For the first time in months, the hermit felt fear knot his chest. He paced the small space, running, his fingers over the rough wood walls, wondering how he'd respond when the bulldozers arrived. He considered leaving quietly but couldn't bear the thought of losing the sanctuary he'd built. He resolved to stay and fight, not with violence but with conviction. He believed that a life reclaimed from desperation had value worth defending. The day of the council hearing arrived and the community center overflowed with anxious onlookers. Whitmore sat at the front in a tailored suit, his arms folded, a smug smile on his lips. The hermit was led in, his clothes dusty and stained, his eyes clear and steady. Journalists leaned forward, snapping photos, recording every moment. A lawyer spoke for Whitmore, detailing property rights and zoning laws. Then the hermit rose and looked directly at the council. He spoke in a calm, resonant voice, recounting how the shed had saved him from addiction, from despair, from losing himself entirely. He described the transformation wrought by hardship, the resilience he'd discovered, the opportunities for self-improvement he'd seized. He spoke not to blame Whitmore or the town, but to make them understand that sometimes the simplest refuge can heal invisible wounds. Silence fell. Council members exchanged uneasy glances. Whitmore rose, his brow furrowed, and demanded to know why the hermit should be allowed to occupy his land when he could offer progress and prosperity. The hermit replied that prosperity was empty without compassion, that progress built on the displacement of the vulnerable was hollow. He asked for just a little more time to finish what he had begun, to harvest his crops, to plant saplings for a community garden he'd envisioned, to teach other struggling souls the skills that had saved him. Just as the council prepared to vote, a deep voice cut across the room. James Whitmore himself stood and, with surprising force, shouted, "Let him go!" The millionaire's tone was not dismissive but wary, as though he spoke to an accused child rather than an interloper. The room froze. Whitmore strode forward, laid aside his suit jacket, and addressed the hermit directly. He admitted that in his zeal for development he'd lost sight of the human lives entwined with every parcel of land. He confessed that watching the hermit's quiet dignity, seeing the community rally to support him, had stirred something long dormant. Empathy. He declared that the shed would remain intact, that the hermit's tenure would be honored, and that the vacant lot would become a public green space, blending the shed as a historical monument and center for learning. Gasps and cheers erupted. The hermit's eyes brimmed with tears as Whitmore extended his hand. The two men clasped, sealing an unlikely alliance. The council reversed its decision, officially designating the shed site a protected landmark. Within weeks, volunteers arrived to help with the garden, turning the once neglected patch into a riot of flowers and vegetables. Local artisans painted murals on the shed's exterior, depicting scenes of growth, healing, and community. Workshops were held inside, teaching woodworking, gardening, and self-reliance. The hermit, no longer hiding, became a mentor to those battling addiction, homelessness, and despair. Over time, the lot transformed into a sanctuary for all who felt lost. The millionaire contributed funds to build a small library adjacent to the shed, stocked with books on philosophy, practical skills, biographies of pioneers, and poetry. Schools arranged field trips so children could learn about resilience and the power of redemption. Elderly residents volunteered to teach traditional crafts. The garden grew abundant produce that fed hungry families. The shed itself remained the heart of the project, a testament to the extraordinary journey of a man who built a life out of nothing and refused to surrender it. The hermit never returned to his old apartment or resumed his former career. He realized that the purpose he'd sought in the world wasn't in climbing ladders of steel and glass, but in inspiring hope and fostering community. He accepted occasional gifts, warm clothes, books, tools, but rejected charity when he could instead share knowledge and labor. He welcomed visitors with a quiet nod, offering sage advice carved from experience, that sometimes the greatest growth comes from surviving your darkest moments, that solitude can heal, but connection sustains. On the second anniversary of his eviction victory, the town gathered in the shed clearing at dawn. Whitmore, now a regular volunteer, handed the hermit a small sapling, a young oak. Without words, the hermit knelt in the damp soil and planted it, pressing earth around the tender roots. The crowd stood in respectful silence as the first rays of sunlight lit the scene. In that moment, the oak symbolized more than new life. It embodied the strength of human compassion, the possibility of change, and the promise that no one need ever face despair alone. Years later, when the oak had grown into a sturdy tree, the hermit, now known simply as the gardener, would sit beneath its branches and share his story with newcomers lost in the tumult of modern life. He told them how he had once lived alone in a shed for 2 years, how he had confronted fear, hunger, and isolation, and how the intervention of a millionaire's unexpected cry of "let him go" had not only spared his refuge but sparked a movement of community and care. He reminded them that every person has value, that every act of kindness ripples outward, and that sometimes all it takes is one voice demanding mercy to transform a life. He lived alone in a shed for 2 years until a millionaire yelled, "Let him go." And in that cry resounded the truth that our destinies are intertwined, that redemption is never out of reach, and that the smallest shelter can become a beacon of hope for the world.